Good evening, Task Force Bighorn, and thank you for joining me on Jupiter Training for Leaders. We're talking about Book 4 on killing, the psychological cost of killing during combat. I want to put a few housekeeping items out there before we get started. First, disclaimer, the views presented here are solely the authors and the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of DoD or its components. We're also using the fair use doctrine for the limited use so that we can use this for commentary, teaching, scholarship, all of that. Also, this is an educational platform. This is for educational and leadership development purposes only. So with that, let's get into it. Let's talk about the next installment of Jupiter Training for Leaders. As we do that, we're talking about the 169 Fab Vision on time, on target, every time. So let's keep that in mind as we go through these slides. As I mentioned, we're talking about Book 4, On Killing, The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society by Dave Grossman. It's a very interesting book, and I really hope everyone has read it. If not, go back and read it, and then think about all of the discussion points that we're going to bring up as we go through this. But the main reason we're reading this is we are soldiers first and leaders second. We must understand how, why, what, and where our emotions impact, and the need to provide overwhelming fires in order to subdue the enemy. Yes, that's field artillery specific. I also think we seldom focus on the mental, the psychological, and the intellectual aspects of what our job actually entails. The main point of this book, as well as this installment of Jupiter Training, is to see how killing, learning to be a professional artillery soldier, and how protecting others is impacting all of us in different lifelong ways. I mean that in two ways. First, different lifelong ways. We're talking about a difference between us and a civilian who never goes through the training for field artillery. We're also talking about different in terms of our own self with our soldiers. My experience may be different than another soldier's experience. So I want us to be aware of all of that. The big bluff and big picture is, let's think about the mental, psychological, and intellectual aspects of what our job entails, of what we're actually asked to do. For everyone who also read the book, it talks about standoff distance, how far away somebody is when we pull the trigger or flip the switch or rip the cord and something goes boom to kill somebody. How far away somebody is also plays a role in our psychological response. So let's be mindful of that as we go through these slides. So again, we talked about this last time. For Jupiter Training themes, these are all questions. And these are questions I want us to consider as we go through all of Jupiter Training. It's questions for us to answer individually. First, what patterns emerge from the books we've discussed thus far? We're here on Book 4 of Jupiter Training for Leaders. So what patterns have you recognized? What is emerging from all of this that we've talked about so far? Are similar core principles, ideas, statements, standards, or questions show what each author discusses? Are there any similarities between all of these authors that we've read? How are those fitting together, or how are they dissonant from each other? How is success defined by each author? Again, we talked about it last time. There's a different definition. How do authors discuss pain? How has there been a painful event each author has gone through, and how is it discussed and revealed within their books? So again, those are the Jupiter Training themes that I want everyone to be thinking about, and you can answer them on your own. So let's get into additional themes that we're specifically going to focus on. First, we're talking about the organizational longevity within Bighorn. Bighorn will not be around forever. Bighorn will be around. We, as a soldier in Bighorn, won't be around forever. So how is the Task Force Bighorn and the Bighorn Battery going to be implementing whatever they need to in the future, partially based on what we do today? That's the organizational longevity that we're talking about. Be about more than ourselves. We're talking about our mentality and viewpoint, and they actually matter when we attack problem sets. We're talking about leaders having the responsibility within the organization to let that organization grow naturally into what the organization needs. Again, carryover theme from last book, but that's also present here. Another carryover theme, failure isn't a dirty word. It's a window to see our growth occurring. And then most humans are not asked or volunteered, as we actually do, to complete the missions we face. So how do we take care of ourselves and each other when we accomplish those missions? Again, most humans are not asked. Most humans do not volunteer like we have volunteered within the field artillery to complete the missions that we are actually facing. So how do we take care of ourselves and each other as we face and accomplish and achieve what we do in those missions. So let's go on to our top 3 points from specifically the book. 1, how do we express our experiences? 2, what is done to prevent atrocity? 3, is there a disconnect between civilians and soldiers in learning to kill? Those are the top 3 discussion points to have in our minds, and so we answer them as we go through this, or just have it in your mind when we're going through and we can talk about it at the end. Again, we're not doing this in person. If anyone wants to discuss this more, please reach out. I would love to discuss this more. If anyone wants an in-person training, in-person actual sit down to talk about what's going on, please reach out. Let me know. So high-level takeaways, again, from this book. Takeaway, one of the overarching themes, important items, or something we focus on within Bighorn to make us better as leaders, soldiers, citizens, and individuals. So I want everyone to take away something from this. Be thinking about that and how you're going to take away something from this discussion and what it will make you. The lesson that we're talking about, a lesson is a how, a why, a what, a strategy, or a specific learning objective from the high-level takeaway. So we have the high-level takeaway where I hope we learn something, and then the lesson will be identified. And that lesson is, what's the point? Last, on the slides, there's an italics. That italics represents a rhetorical question and reflection item. The internal thoughts and future leadership to improve Bighorn Battery. So that rhetorical question and reflection item is something that we will be discussing as we go through this. But it's for you to decide on your own how you're going to address or implement what we're actually talking about. So let's talk about our overall roadmap. Soldiers are trained to kill. That should not be a surprise to anyone. In our profession, the profession of combat, specifically in field artillery, we are trained to kill. And as we are trained to kill, even if we are never actually told to do so, we are experiencing psychological trauma from extended combat and killing. Here, Bighorn has had a number of deployments in the past. There's a long lineage to our battery. But are we recognizing that within Bighorn? And are we normalizing something? So here, we're talking about the emotional reaction to killing and providing support to combat veterans. Is that actually something that we are doing? Are we helping combat veterans? There is a psychological trauma from being in combat. Do we actually recognize that we're trained to kill? When we're trained to kill, we're going to do that in combat because that's what we're supposed to do. Have we taken that step back? And are we seeing if this is a normal experience or not? And are we supporting soldiers going through this? Another roadmap question is, do we discuss psychological casualties in an appropriate level? By that, I mean everyone has a psychological consequence. Are we actually addressing that, recognizing it, or talking about it in Bighorn? Mental health is important. We're talking about the importance of mental health within Bighorn as well. Do those psychological atrocities actually rise to a level that is being addressed appropriately? Do we know how to recognize that? Is there anyone that has a question about that? Let's help them out. Let's say, hey, this is how we recognize and support a psychological casualty. Have any of my soldiers suffered from a psychological casualty that remains an issue or keeps me or my soldier or my team from realizing the potential as a leader within the organization? So let's be self-reflective. Field artillery is more lethal based on the distance from targets. I talked about that a little bit in the opening, the standoff distance. Now, that lethality and how lethal we are from a distance, does that affect us, especially when we're shooting rockets, especially when HIMARS are sending rounds downrange? Does that impact us? Also, another layer, all of the drone footage we see. On the last deployment, we had drone overwatch for everything that we shot. We saw when rounds impacted. Does that especially impact us differently? Say from tube artillery, sure, they're closer to what they're shooting, but they're not actually seeing front hand what they are shooting. HIMARS, we're seeing what we're shooting through that video feed sometimes. Our ability to kill causes stress and strain even when we are trained properly and appropriately to complete the mission. That should not be a surprise to anyone. Even when we're appropriately trained, something happens in the mission. Something goes wrong. We need to react to something. We're trained to what? Adapt and overcome. We're trained to what? Always be flexible. So our ability to kill causes stress even if we are properly trained. So even when we're properly trained in our warrior task battle drills and how we're actually executing something, there is a strain to that. So let's be mindful. Even when we're appropriate and proper in mission completion, there is something there that affects us. As we talked a little bit on the last slide, face to face versus long range combat affects us all. Let's continue checking in on fellow soldiers. Again, face to face combat, being right in somebody's face, shooting somebody maybe 50 meters away or closer, has a different impact than shooting someone 300 meters, 500 meters, or sending rockets downrange. So let's check in on fellow soldiers because it does affect all of us. Is there a place for the Colorado Army National Guard, our specific brigade, our specific battalion, our battery, or our platoon to support mental health objectives and larger life issues when needed? Now, it's a question because it legitimately is a question that I want us all to ponder, especially leaders. Is there a place for the COARG, brigade, battalion, battery, or platoon to support mental health objectives and larger life issues when needed? If a soldier has an issue and something comes up, can we actually support that? And also, should we be proactive in how we are supporting that and looking at it? Again, these are all themes that we've taken from this book. So let's ask our first deeper level question. And again, it's in italics, so we know it's a deeper level question to ponder for ourselves than a rhetorical question. Based on my own experiences and worldview and career within the COARG, what can I pass along to my soldiers to prepare for the future deployments? What can I do to support soldiers returning from deployments? Notice how this isn't focused on us. This isn't focused on me as the individual soldier getting ready for the deployment. I am passing along what I have learned from a deployment, and I'm also accepting people back into the COARG family from a deployment. A lot of times we look just to Bighorn and say, Bighorn deployed, Bighorn returned. That is what we need to do. Also, we need to look at how when we deploy and return, that affects another unit. And when another unit comes in, how are we actually helping them? I won't forget when we got back from our last deployment, I stepped off the plane and there were a number of colonels and majors standing on the tarmac, shaking their hands as we came in. I didn't know most of them, but it felt good knowing that high-level people in the organization greeted me when I came home. I did recognize two, though. And those two that I recognized, when I shook their hand, one of them I was kind of shocked they were there, but I knew them. And they said, I needed to support you being home because you've been gone for a long time. I didn't know that person cared about me. I don't know if they were telling me the truth or not. I do know I'm going to pass that along to another soldier returning from a deployment because when I returned home, that's what I needed to hear. So when that soldier returns home, maybe that is exactly what they need to hear. So that is something I am going to specifically implement in the future. So again, this rhetorical question, based on my own experiences and worldview and career within the COARG, what can I pass along to my soldiers to prepare for the future deployments? What can I do to support soldiers returning from deployments? All right, let's get into the high-level takeaways. And again, we're not going very deep into all of these, but really, this is a discussion about the book. So again, if you want this to be an in-person discussion or you want a training to be conducted, please reach out. Let me know. I would love to come out and do that with everyone. These are just the high-level takeaways, the 5 main ones from the book that I want everyone to think about, and we can discuss them. First, there's a psychological cost. To everything we do as field artillery, there is a psychological cost. What is that cost? How am I addressing that cost? How am I looking at that appropriately? And how am I treating soldiers when they need help? We're trained to kill. There's no question. Sure, we can suppress, we can neutralize, we can destroy, we can engage. Those are all different things in field artillery we can do to the enemy. But really, we are trained to kill. Our purpose is to have violence of action inflicted upon the enemy so they cannot inflict it upon us. So with that mindset and being trained to kill, how is that different than society? How is there a cognitive dissonance between go kill somebody, I'm giving you my blessing as the American population, and then coming home and saying, no, can't do that anymore. You've been trained for however many years to go make sure that everyone's safe and you can kill the enemy before they get you. But the second we come home, we can't address problems with the same problem set mentality. So let's think about that as a high level takeaway. There's wider societal aggression. Again, the book gets into that a lot more, but looking at this within that specific societal context and how this training we undergo and the psychological cost either contributes or detracts from that societal aggression. Now, is there something here that there's a restraint, or is there something here that is somehow unlocking that inner aggression? Things to think about. So, with our next point, number 4 is teaching restraint. Here, I'm not talking about teaching restraint as in like, oh, don't pull the trigger, that's a bad idea. No, we're talking about psychological restraint and viewing our actions within that specific restraint criteria. So teaching our soldiers, everyone else coming back from deployment, that restraint is important and it's actually beneficial and it's something that can be learned. That goes along with our 5th and final takeaway. Training adaptations are successful. Training adaptations are successful. How do we use what we have actually been trained to do and have it in a different light so that we can be successful in all aspects of our life? It is something we can do. There's a success to it. So how can we actually use that training? So let's look at the first one in depth. The military has learned how to train and condition soldiers to overcome resistance to killing, though there's a high psychological cost associated to these actions. The military knows what they're doing. There's tens of thousands of people coming into military every year. Sure, different branches have a different viewpoint on killing. Different branches have different approaches. But the military as a whole has learned how to train and condition soldiers, because we don't want a soldier to second guess if they should kill somebody or not, because that time that they take to second guess means they're dead and they can't complete the mission. So the high psychological cost associated is something the military is absolutely willing to take. As an individual, it is a very high cost to bear. So let's be mindful of that. The lesson here is there's several factors that contribute to those psychological casualties we talked about. They can be on the battlefield or some other psychological casualty. But the combat soldiers are focused, and the combat soldier, they fear they will either kill another human and feel guilty because of the responsibility for killing, or combat soldiers fear they will be unable to kill, and that means letting their unit down or placing others in more danger. The lesson here said differently is soldiers, especially combat soldiers, are worried they won't be able to complete the mission. That's really what this boils down to. Because either they're going to feel so guilty and such a responsibility for killing another individual that it will hurt them in some way and they psychologically can't continue on the mission, or they'll be unable to do it at all. Both of those are real fears. So let's go with our rhetorical takeaway here, right? So let's think about this as we continue to be leaders in Bighorn. Is it true for me that I'm worried when I'm in combat that I will be unable to kill and let my soldiers down? Is that a worry that you still have that's been instilled because of basic combat training, all the other trainings we've conducted, being a field artillery combat arms professional? Is it true for me that I am worried when I'm in combat I will be unable to kill and will let my soldiers down? Let's move on. High level takeaway number 2. Training is important and we train on our weapons, but what about training on ourselves? So General Mattis is quoted as saying, engage your mind before you engage your weapon in response to how we can overtake adversaries. And that's a very telling way, because General is thinking about not only the psychological cost, not only the training cost, not only the adaptive training, but he was thinking about how the mission could be completed without even having a weapon necessarily. So engaging our mind before we engage in our weapon. Let's think about that as we go forward as a takeaway. The lesson within this is our training specifically addresses hesitation connected to taking a life. Training is necessary when we prepare for brutal realities of war we might face. We have experienced combat. None of us have experienced war. Training is necessary to prepare for the brutal reality of war we might face. We have all experienced combat. None of us have experienced war. And I think that last point that's underlined is extremely important. It was in the context, though, of somebody talking about the next war, World War III, the next Great War, whatever that actual specific name was going to be put on that future conflict. This person was a decorated combat veteran, and they specifically turned to the person that was interviewing them and said, "No one here has experienced war, but we have all experienced combat. And we have all experienced combat. None of us have experienced war." And so I took that last piece and I thought it was just extremely telling of no matter how much we are trained, we are going to have to deal with something different. And that's going back to the general quote of engaging our mind before our weapon. So here, what is our takeaway and rhetorical question? Does Bighorn associate strength to our stories and struggles, or do we shy away from them? Does Bighorn associate strength to our stories and struggles, or do we shy away from them? Let's go to high level takeaway number 3. Escalation of violent, aggressive, and deadly conduct in society reflects the training techniques employed by the armed forces. I alluded to this a little bit when I previewed the 5 big takeaways, but the fact that we are escalating in violence and aggression, that's within our society. Is that connected to the training we receive? And how can we actually be mindful so that we aren't committing atrocities outside the battlefield? This is related to the increased acceptance of violence in daily life. Again, with the drone footage, every single round we send down range, right? There's overwatch from a drone. But the reality of our violent daily life is seen in our movies and our books and our TV shows. It's seen when people have the news on. We have a front seat to so much violence. Yet we are also trained to desensitize somewhat. And as we talked about, we don't hesitate in combat arms to take somebody's life if we need to. So how is that overlap happening? The lesson for us to take away and think about is the military purpose in overcoming soldiers' resistance is to increase our battlefield effectiveness and ensure our survival. Again, the whole point of this is to overcome the resistance to what we're actually doing that is bad, killing, in order to increase our battlefield effectiveness and ensure our survival. Again, the Army wants us to survive on the battlefield so we complete the mission. That Army is willing to bear that high psychological cost, which is extremely devastating to that individual soldier sometimes. So when we're looking at that after the semicolon, however, the indiscriminate application of similar techniques in civilian society is having a negative impact on our communities. So the training we receive from the Army is very important. However, the indiscriminate application, when we look at that within every single technique in civilian society, has that negative impact. How do I interact with society at large after being in the military? Have my deployments changed my perception and interactions? So there's an Israeli research project that was done. Research revealed if somebody is kidnapped or captured, and whoever is the person capturing you blindfolds you or puts a hood over you, you're far more likely to be killed. Now, why is that? The reason somebody is more likely to be killed if they're blindfolded or if there's a mask or some sort of hood over them is that whole mentality of I can't see, so I'm safe. So it's that mentality we talked about before in the standoff distance. The farther away somebody is, the harder it is to see them. So it's okay to kill them. And that partly is, specifically in field artillery, something that we do have to deal with. So the mentality of I can't see, so I'm safe is counter to what is actually keeping that human alive. The human that's blindfolded is like, I'm okay, I can't see, I'm safe. But that's not keeping them alive. What actually keeps someone from killing is looking into the eyes of another human being and having to kill them. Again, that is the difficulty, and that is the difference of somebody being right in front of us, 50 meters away, or farther. The lesson here is restraint. Restraint is as important in our training as learning to kill. When have I exercised restraint by doing something I could have, but I didn't? How did I go through that analysis in arriving at my conclusion? When have I exercised restraint by doing something I could have, but I didn't? How did I go through that analysis in arriving at my conclusion? Let's go into the high level final takeaway number 5. Again, we talked about studies a little bit in the last slide, and here we're talking about some other studies. So studies from the Civil War, World War I, and World War II demonstrated a firing rate much lower than we would anticipate in today's trained military. Specifically, World War II had a firing rate at about 15%, 15%. So based on the lessons learned from those conflicts, the Army overhauled all of its training, and it still overhauls it continually, implementing new strategies and new training. That implementation surrounds killology and conditioning. And yes, those are the words from the book. Those new training techniques implement killology and conditioning to the combat tasks, which results in a much higher firing rate during our present conflicts. So during our present conflicts, much more people are actually putting those rounds downrange. And the Army knows this. The Army trains this. The Army specifically looks at it and they see, how can we do this? So the lesson for us is, we don't know how we act in combat until we are there. And that is why training is so important. I don't know how I'm going to act in combat until I'm shot at, until I'm actually there, until I'm on ground. So the training that I receive is extremely important into how I will actually act in combat. So the Army knows this, and they are implementing ways to make us more combat effective in all areas of combat. So I want us to think about a few things. A little bit more specific question in terms of the takeaway question. How has training affected me even if I haven't killed? How has training affected me even if I haven't killed? Does flip, switch, go, whoosh impact me, whether it's Mike 28, Mike 30, Mike 31, Mike 57, etc., through the MFOM? Does it matter? 99.9% of people will go their whole life without killing another human. So for us specifically, field artillery in HIMARS, does flip, switch, go, whoosh impact me, whether it's Mike 28, Mike 30, Mike 31, Mike 57, etc., through the MFOM? And does it matter that 99.9% of people will go their whole life without killing another human? Those are things to ponder. Again, for the high-level takeaways, we've discussed 5 ones here. The psychological cost, training to kill, the wider societal aggression we see and experience, why teaching restraint is important, why it's necessary, and the training adaptations are successful. We have a high firing rate, and those adaptations can also go the other way if we want to choose something and adapt it differently. So again, thank you. I appreciate everyone in Bighorn. I thank you for paying attention to yourself as a leader within Bighorn, paying attention to those subtleties and nuances of soldiers so that we can care for them better. So genuinely, thank you for taking care of soldiers. With that, I appreciate you listening to Task Force Bighorn. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. And as always, how will we make Bighorn better going forward? How are we going to change Bighorn for the better based on what we learn in Jupiter training, just in our everyday lives? How will we make Bighorn better going forward? Destined to climb.